right, everybody, welcome to the next edition of the Here for the Truth side chat. This is a side series which Yerasimos and I started last year. Shorter format, more casual conversations, but amazing guests as always. And today's no different with Namakula in the house. She is a multi-talented artist born to a nutty academic Ugandan father and a feisty Jamaican mother. Her bicultural upbringing cultivated her creative and empathetic nature, fueling her curiosity to explore foreign lands, indie music, dark comedy, and comic books. After many years developing her talent in NYC, her work runs the gamut from TV, film, commercials, theater, voiceover, music, and stand up comedy. Her quirky character can be seen in skits on Conan O'Brien, in her original web series, Kate and Kula. Notably, she was cast as understudy in the Pulitzer Prize winning play Fairview. And of late, you can catch her in episodes of NBC's New Amsterdam, The Blacklist, and Netflix's Inventing Anna. When she's not in front of the camera, you can find her laughing and learning, playing original jams on her bass, and daydreaming amongst the trees in the sunshine with her kitty, Frankie Sinatra. But beyond all of that, Namakula, our listeners right here might recognize you and your voice for one very particular reason. What would that be?
I do a lot of voiceover work. I guess I did a big campaign for Smirnoff. I was the brand voice. This was in the early 2000s, so they might remember Smirnoff Ice, triple black, premium malt beverage, a refreshing bite. And then I've done a bunch of other stuff over the years. A recent one I did was for petsandpeopletogether.org last September, which was a really great campaign because it was about people who have pets who might be going overseas or might be ill or need funding to pay for food or medical bills. So I was the voiceover for that. And there's some really nice spots. So I love the opportunity to be able to lend my voice to projects that resonate with me, but also that are not just about selling a product, but I actually have some meaning and sort of value to it as far as humanity goes.
Yeah,
So,
and what one of those key projects is that, Namakula?
what'd you say?
What are one of those key projects? The space that you're in right now.
Oh, what do you mean?
Our podcast.
Oh, podcast. I'm sorry. Yes, the podcast. Yes. You guys were so. I'm very proud that you asked me to do the show opener for your podcast. So that was pretty exciting. So
how does it go? Do you remember how it goes? You're now listening to the Here for the
you're
Truth
now
podcast.
listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
There we go. There we go. I love it.
Yeah.
So great to have you on here. And just first of all, obviously I've known you for so many years. I think we're going on 15 years now since we met in John Dapolito's acting class and worked on a play called The Mercy Seat. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
But yeah, just wanted to have you on here and just highlight you for, the journey that you've been on. And also, especially over the last 3 years, you've kind of stood strong to your principles and your morals, and you've noticed some things happening in your industry, especially in the union. And you've made the decision to run for local president of your union because I guess you're just not happy with how things have been run. So, I mean, we can get into that. Or if you want to just talk a little bit about your personal journey, like what's led you to being this fierce human being that you are.
I think a lot of it goes back to, like you were saying, my intro, my upbringing, growing up in two parents from two different countries. So I had two different cultures that I was growing up with, but in an American. So I leave the house, it'd be an American culture, but in the house, it was not American culture. So I felt there's a lot of fitting in that had to go on. And there was also a lot of boxes that people wanted to put me in based on how I looked rather than my life experience. So that always bothered me. And I was always very aware of that. And also, I always had a diverse group of friends. So I always had friends who were just from different backgrounds, even different ages. So I don't really buy into this whole, like, you're only hanging around your peers. I always feel like I can learn from somebody who's 8 or who's 80. So that was how I always was. And when I realized not everybody had that perspective or that upbringing, it was very interesting to me, and it explained a lot about how the world is as far as how people are viewed. So I think that's where my kind of independent spirit came from, just from always kind of being the odd, like atypical. And I was always a creative kid. I was always very artistic and always just try different things. Whether I excelled at them or not is another story, but I was always open to things. And my parents never pressured us, my sisters and I, to be a certain thing. They encouraged us to be valuable people, to be educated, but it was never a thing where like said that, okay, you've got to be this way, you've got to be that way. So I was always encouraged to just kind of grow into myself. So I gravitated towards acting because again, that, you fit into a label. But I think that even when I came to New York, to Strasberg at NYU, I never really totally felt like that was totally me, because I don't think I'm just like an actor. I feel like I'm an artist, ever evolving, and I'm, like I said, I try different things. But that was my point of focus, was that, and studying the craft, and connecting with people and being in New York City was very exciting. I feel like upon finishing my studies in school anyway, I decided that I really didn't. I wanted, if I was going to be doing something, I didn't want to be an actor waiting tables. I had done that. I worked in a hotel. I worked at restaurants. And if I was going to be somewhere, I want to be somewhere where I was learning. So I fell into an internship. I was looking for a film internship, but I got an internship at an editorial house that edited TV commercials. And I never knew anything about the industry. I never even thought about it. Interned there. When I was done with school, they offered me an apprenticeship and I took it. And then I did a detour for about 15 years where I was totally working in post, which is one of the best experiences ever, because I learned so much about performance, writing, acting, working with ad agencies, working with these top production companies, directors, and I learned all these different facets of the business. So doing that for a number of years and then working my way up to editor. While I was doing that, I was always, kind of writing on the side. I wrote spec scripts. I did stand-up comedy. And when it got to a point where I wanted to see if I could explore like building a career in acting, I went freelance and kind of started over again. I literally went door to door with my headshot, met casting directors, ended up signing with a big commercial agent, booked a lot of stuff, voiceover, on camera stuff. So it was a building from there, but I was always trying different things. But what was great about it was because I spent all those years in post, I could go into an audition room and have a completely different perspective about what was going on. Whereas other actors would go in and they'd worry about things that I knew that was out of their control. So a lot of the times when I started to make more friends in the acting world, I would say, what you're thinking is not what's really going on. If you look like someone's ex-wife, they're not going to cast you. Like there's a lot of things that because being in those rooms, I would hear these conversations. Sometimes, awful things like a creative might think somebody's cute and they call them for a callback, have no intention of casting them, and then just bring them because they wanted to screw with them. There's just crazy stuff. So I was always able to walk in, present the work, have fun, and leave it in the room. I was never one of those people to audition and then obsess about when the callback is. Why wasn't I called? Am I going to get called? And I think that's how you develop a balance. And I was always, like I said, interested in other things. So in addition to doing that, I still did some freelance editing. Then at some point I was, when I was a kid, I played the guitar and I wanted to be this big shredder. That never happened. But years later, friends who had a band, they needed a bassist. So then I started learning the bass and then I started playing gigs in New York City. And that was something that as a kid, I aspired to do, but forgot about it. And there was like a dream that came around again. So I got that opportunity. So I was always kind of dipping into different areas and developing myself and growing and being expansive and not allowing myself to be put in a box and say, well, you're this age, so you can't do this, or, this is going to take a long time, so don't bother doing that. I always thought about, well, if you're alive, it's never too late, right? So just go for it. So yeah, I joined the union in 1999. And I was really excited, and it was really, for me, like, it kind of made it like you're a serious actor. You're in the union, you're going out, you're being protected, you have benefits, health benefits. It was really exciting. And I feel like as the time went by, I was seeing things about the union that I had problems with, but I would go to the meetings and I would contribute. And like I said, I come from a perspective where I had been working in advertising. So I did understand the inner workings. So when, for example, SAG was complaining about, I was seeing there were changes happening, and SAG was complaining about, well, some of these producers, they're not using union people. And I said, well, what's happening? They're firing all the seasoned people. They're bringing in college people who have no experience. They're dumping 5 projects on them. There's no mentorship. So it's easier to go so I said, there are ways that we can combat this by getting in there. We can go in there and talk to them and explain to them, maybe designate a SAG person who's their point of contact to make it easier for them to work with union actors, but no one would listen. And it got frustrating. And so I just noticed little things like that. And then even in the early 2000s, there was a commercial strike, and then all the clients went overseas and shot and realized, wow, we can save so much money shooting overseas. So that screwed us over. So
real quick, can you just explain what, like, our audience might not know what SAG is, so can you just explain?
The Screen Actors Guild is the union for TV film actors. So when you are in that union, if you earn your way in, and you pay a fee to get in, and you pay dues like any other union, but you are protected. You are, if there's any kind of safety issues on a set or pay issues, you have a union that will fight for you and protect you. And if you earn a certain amount of money, you get health benefits, and the benefits are really great. And there's a pension plan. So it's a great union to be a part of. I mean, it was. Now I'm not sure what's happening with it, but so that was why it was great, because if you do non-union work, there's no recourse if somebody decides, I'm not going to pay you on time, or you're going to wait a year, or I'm not paying you at all, or I'm disappearing, or the set isn't safe, so it's a protection. And I think a lot of actors, most actors, I think, would aspire to get in the union, and it opens up other doors, because, most TV shows are union films. So again, you're getting exposed to a different caliber of talent and opportunities. What was I saying? I forgot.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, like, so let's just get right into it. You've decided to run for local president. Like, what does that mean? Just running for it, and also, why are you running for it? This position.
All right, so I'm running for the New York local president. That gets you in those rooms to vote on making decisions that affect the union members. And what's happened is that our union, which was originally supposed to be run by members, it's been infiltrated. Most of the people who are making the decisions, who are in control, are not actors. They're not part of the union. They are bureaucrats who've gotten their way, weaseled their way in there, and have been literally picking apart the union, like financially, morale-wise, everything. So some things that really bugged me were, one of the things was with the healthcare. With the previous president, it was agreed, I don't know why people would vote for this, but people who were seniors, who were basically not working anymore, but maybe had lifetime careers, they would still make money from residuals of shows that they were on. So the money, like I said, you earn goes towards your health insurance. You make a certain amount of money, your health insurance. It was decided that all of a sudden those residuals didn't count. So you have somebody that maybe has been an actor for 50 years, is now in their late 70s or 80s, isn't working anymore, and they're getting healthcare because their old TV show's still running. Now SAG is saying that doesn't count. That money that that's coming from that show, that can't go towards your healthcare. So all these seniors were kicked off their healthcare. And I come from a culture where you take care of your elderly people. You don't put them in a nursing home. You don't discard them. So the idea that somebody thought this was okay to do, while other people who are in SAG, who I said the bureaucrats, who are making ridiculous amounts of money, six figures with no experience, is, it was just reprehensible to me. So stuff like that, if you're on the board, you can have a voice in the room. You can vote. You can perhaps persuade other people who might be making the wrong decisions. So I feel like I said all along, I would go to the meetings, I would try to have a voice, but ultimately I'm just another member there. But if you're actually involved, if you are have a place on there, if you're a delegate, if you are a local president, you can have an influence, and a positive influence. And that's why I'm doing this. In the past few years, what's gone on with the mandates, not just with SAG, but in general, has been freaking nightmare. And when the first union, which is Equity, which was the union for the theater actors, when they implemented, okay, nobody can work unless you get a vaccine, right? And I remember hearing that, and I thought, how is that possible? This isn't even, it's an experimental product that's untested, that's being pushed out by these pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer being one of them, that has paid $3 billion in criminal charges against them, including bribing doctors. So I'm like, how are they? I was shocked. So I contacted an actress that I know who does a lot of theater. She does TV and film, but a lot of theater. I said, have you heard about this? And she says, yeah, that seems like it would be a violation. I said, yeah, Nuremberg Code. Come on. And I thought, well, maybe SAG wouldn't do it. And they didn't for a while. So I was feeling confident that maybe at some point there would be a reversal, but I feel like what happened was they edged closer and closer towards doing it. And I remember I contacted a friend of mine who's a lawyer, a personal injury lawyer. And I said, are they allowed to do something like that? I don't understand how. And he said, well, yeah, an employer. I said, well, it doesn't really make sense to me. You're going to force somebody or coerce somebody saying they can't work unless they inject themselves with something that is untested. Even if it was tested, if somebody doesn't want to do it, you're forcing some. So I felt like there was a lot of fear going on, and people were making decisions not out of ethics or logic, but just out of, well, this is what the TV box told me to, and this is what this person on TV says, so it must be true. So people weren't doing any research. So when my last job that I booked was 2021, and it was Under the Wire. It was a online series with Amber Ruffin. It was really fun, but it was one of those things where my agent said, "Oh, you're vaccinated, right?" Like in an email, like assuming. And I said, "No, is that a problem?" "Oh, no, it's fine." But I remember thinking, "Uh-oh, what's happening?" And that was the last job that I booked. And then after that, that's when SAG was like, "Oh, right to work agreements," and they're basically saying you have to have these. They basically implemented an agreement that said that they were imposing these mandates, and they were saying that if you wanted to work, you had to, what it was, you either had to have, they had specific brands, Pfizer, Johnson Johnson, or Moderna. And but they were supposedly saying that they would make accommodations if somebody had a religious exemption or maybe a medical exemption. However, I think that was not true, because I've never heard of anybody during this period getting an exemption at all. And what they were doing was, which is also illegal, they were within the language of the casting notices, they would say, you have to be vaccinated for this project, which is a violation of my medical privacy. You're not allowed to ask somebody what their medical history is, or what they're choosing to put in their body or not put in their body. So they would find ways around it. Like, for example, if you had an audition, sometimes they would say, in your slate, state your name, city, and your vaccination status. And I thought, well, if someone does say it,
They were doing that in slates?
Oh yeah, some castings would actually request it, but then they would say, it's okay if you're not. I said, well, if it's okay if you're not, then why are you asking people to do it? So clearly it was a way of weeding people out. So if somebody did a slate and let's say they didn't say their status, I'm assuming they would be like, oh, well, they didn't answer, so they probably aren't, to chuck them. Or if somebody says, I'm not, to chuck them. So you had that happening. And then you just have outright people like, I'm not with my manager anymore, but like, when they started, I was getting a lot of traction getting into the rooms that I'd worked years to get into. I was booking TV commercials. I was booking TV shows and making relationships with these casting directors who were calling me in for a bunch of stuff. And that all stopped because of this, return to work agreement, where Zone A, which is for principal actors, they for safety reasons, they divided the sets into Zone A, B, and C. And Zone A was all the principal people. So to work in Zone A, you had to be vaccinated, and then you had to be boosted. So it really was discriminating against people based on their medical choices, and people that were submitting for accommodations, whether it be religious or medical, they were being denied. And a lot of doctors weren't even writing medical exemption. So people were in this situation where either I won't work, or I will audition and I'll keep silent. And then if they hire me, then on the back end, I would say, well, you have to make an accommodation. And then they could choose to not, or they could choose to try to. But for the most part, only the big celebrities are the people that were able to really get around this, or people who had fake cards. And I wasn't going to do that, because by doing a fake card, I'm in essence complying with the tyranny. And none of this would have happened if everybody stood up, because right now SAG is on the verge of possibly striking, right? So if everybody 2 years ago in SAG said, "Hey, I'm not doing this. We're all like doing an unofficial strike," this wouldn't be happening. So I think too many people complied. I think too many people buckled. Too many people did not do any research to find out what's going on with these products, which now it's coming out now. But this was all the thing about these demonic companies, is that they were out in the open with this from the beginning. Like if you go to the site, it would say, oh, there's not stop infection or transmission, but it might lessen symptoms and keep you out of the hospital. I remember I was talking to a doctor friend of mine. I said, well, why are you taking this? Because it clearly said, and I pointed out to her, and she agreed with me, but then she screams at me when we're on the phone, why did it keep me from ending up in the hospital? So even a doctor is buying into this fear mongering. I said, but there's not even proof of that. They're saying it might lessen symptoms, it might keep. So how about we just exercise, eat well, go outside, hang out with friends, and not inject ourselves with chemicals and graphene oxide? I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah. How did this impact your life, your financial life, by, not being hired, or for standing for your principles?
Well, it's been a ride. I mean, like I said, I'm very resourceful. So what happened was,
I mean, I bring it up because it's like, here you are, this individual that's standing for principles that has been working. I mean, you were working, and then up until this moment, this decision didn't allow you to do the thing that you're trained to do and that you love to do. And of course, that's going to impact you in a negative way because, like you said, many people, because of conditioning, programming, misinformation, they went along to get along and
Yeah.
you didn't. And that's one reason why, we've stayed connected this whole time, why I have the utmost respect for you, and also why we decided to have you be the voice of our intro because you represent what we're all about.
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, I'll be frank. I'm kind of on the verge of losing my apartment right now. But before that happened, I was, like I said, very resourceful. So I do other things. And so I was able to book some voiceover work, but also some other type of work, some producing work. I booked a recruiting contract last year for a few months that enabled. I basically I'd gone down to Florida for a job. I was freelancing as a producer creative with an ad agency. They flew us down to Miami to do an in-person presentation to a pitch to the client. And then instead of coming back up here, I did a detour to Tampa where my sister lives and basically stayed on her couch for 6 months. And while I was there, because just to get out of New York also, I was just like, everybody's crazy here. I got to get out of here. And you and I, reconnected because you're on the West Coast and I'm in New York. So we would do Zoom calls, but there weren't a lot of people physically around me that were of the like mind or, so that was a little strange to me because I'm like, New York City's supposed to be free thinkers. It's not. So when I was down in Florida, I was able to book work based on my experience with as an editor and advertising and those contacts, but I was doing some recruiting for an editorial house. So I was doing that for 3 months. So that was a regular contract that kept me busy. And then I booked some more voiceover work. But what happened was, like you were saying, it was, I was already going down a hole, right? Because my income changed dramatically. So even those jobs that kept me buoyant last year for the spring through summer, when I came back to New York in September, I wasn't booking consistent work at all. And then they extended. So then this is what happened. In August, I had a conversation with the current New York local president of SAG because in September they had an opportunity to either drop the return to work agreement or to extend it. So I wanted to get feel on where it was going because at this point there was information coming out. There was the science was out there. A lot of these mandates were being repealed. People who had been laid off and fired were filing lawsuits. People were getting their jobs back. So things were changing. It wasn't 2020 anymore. SAG thought it was 2020. So in September, so I was talking to him in August about what do you think is going to happen in September when they have the option to extend or not. And he just assumed for a few reasons that I was on the same page as him, meaning push mandates. So I let him talk first. And then I realized, he's probably going to vote to extend this thing. So then I let him know, well, here's my stance on it. And he was he listened and he was sympathetic that, what's happened with work and what's going on. But when I would talk to him about, well, if you're agreeing that, this doesn't stop infection or transmission, why is this mandate still being pushed? And he's saying, well, we want to keep people safe. I said, but if you're saying it doesn't work, 3 times I went through this and I just realized, you know what? He's just repeating what he's been told to say or what he thinks makes sense. It made no sense. So sure enough, in September, they extended the mandates again. So when I came back up from Florida in September, again, I mean, I had booked a voiceover campaign, but outside of that, I wasn't able to, my bread and butter was working as a commercial actor. I wasn't submitted for that stuff. I couldn't, like I said, at that point, my manager had dropped me because whatever. So I couldn't, and even if she had, I was on ice because I couldn't get those TV film auditions. So I basically was, exhausting my funds. I lost my health insurance because I didn't make enough money. And now it's at a point where they kept extending. It wasn't until May 12th of this year that they finally dropped the return to work agreement. However, any production that was already established before then, like before May 12th, they can still implement these mandates, even though they don't make any sense, even though the science keeps coming out. And on top of it, there's been a culture that's been created where the SAG is encouraging or is saying that these producers, if they choose to implement like some sort of testing protocol or whatever, they have the option to do that. So even though it's technically lifted, it's still going on in some respect.
Yeah.
And so to me, anything worth fighting for, it's going to be difficult. And anybody that thinks that they can just sit back and have other people do the work, they're going to end up these people that complied now, there's going to be something worse down the pike. And they're going to realize they should have stood up then. And even some friends of mine who I know who wanted to stay working and did this more than once have had some injuries or some changes in their health. And now they're thinking, oh, well, I don't want to do anymore. Well, you better hope they don't try to implement this, because you doing it the first time and everybody just complying and not asking questions and just saying, well, I'm working, I don't care if you're not working. Look what's happening. Now, as a culture, we're in this weird place. People were ostracized, people were blocked from working. So to answer your question, you just have to take
it's impacted you. It's impacted you, obviously. Yeah. I mean, that's the main thing. It's like you weren't allowed to do the things that you want to do, and it impacted you financially, and all based on, again, from our points of view, and things are coming out, misinformation and pseudoscience.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I think to your point about, I wouldn't feel right about myself because, I could have gotten a fake card, but I wouldn't feel right about that. I would feel like I'm just, putting off the inevitable, which is more tyranny, right? So I just had to make a stand. And I hope that on some level that other people who maybe agree but were afraid to say something will be inspired to speak up or to stand up for themselves, because you only have your health. So the idea that to get a job, I've got to do something like that. I always say if there's situation like that, I always say I'd rather dig a ditch, because I can be creative. I can still do whatever. I don't need to be hired under the stipulation that I do something that is against my principles because you demand it.
Well, you love freedom. I mean, you love freedom, and you want to be able to have the choice of what you do with your own body. I mean, if we can't have that, what are we left with?
Slavery. And I'm realizing that there are a lot of people who are very comfortable being told what to do. And that's the problem. They don't want to think, because then it gets tough. They get inconvenienced, things get uncomfortable. It's been very uncomfortable on a lot of levels for me, not only with like work and my dreams and my career and my, roof over my head, but relationships with people. Sometimes being in situations where I'm like, oh my God, is this person going to be alive? Like, like I was going through anxiety that I couldn't even really totally share. I mean, I did with you, obviously, but I couldn't really share with some people because, they would think I'm crazy, or I would say things like, hey, maybe you shouldn't, like I would try to find ways to get information to people, because you can lead a horse to water, right? But you can't, if people want to know, they'll be open to it. But even when I would just send stuff, half the time someone wouldn't read it, or they would, but then they would make an excuse, and I just thought,
you can't, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And that's the story of how things are.
Do you have support in Namakula? Like, is there much of a collective that is as strongly minded and as strong in their convictions as you? Like, what percentage of the community, feels the same way as you, or do you feel like you're kind of like in your own echo chamber a bit?
Well, like I was saying, like when this happened, I think it is kind of a blessing, because it opened my eyes to what was really going on. And I always thought that New York was a mecca for free thinkers and independent people, and but it's not. I think there were so many I discovered there were so many sheep here. So that's how Yerasimos and I started talking more, because even though he's not close by, I'm like, oh my God, thank God. Because I've known you for years. And actually, when we met, you'd just been traveling around the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We always had interesting conversations. And then we just started talking. Then we kind of had this group that would do a Zoom call. But even during this time with the SAG people, there's a whole bunch of us that aligned in the past year and a half, and a bunch of us decided that we were going to run for positions. So that's what's really exciting about this. I feel like I'm a part of a movement, because there's all these SAG people who are awake and are now running for positions on the board, local, national positions, who are not only addressing this like medical freedom thing, but also addressing the corruption. Our pension fund, somebody embezzled $2 million from it. That person never went to jail. Like, I'm finding out all this stuff. The chief negotiator is secured himself over $1 million. And then you have SAG workers who have taken pay cuts during the pandemic. It doesn't make any sense. So you have people at the top who are getting all the benefits. There's cronyism. They've hired people that have no experience, no in the positions that they're in, but they're getting six figures. And then you have people that in SAG who can't pay their bills, can't have no health insurance, on the verge of losing their home. Their kids have, so I've been able to find people just by virtue of just being me, but also my radar is different. So even when I was in Florida, I'm randomly meeting people who are awake. I'm like, oh my God, thank God, So I feel like there are people that I have a community, but the community isn't necessarily in close proximity. A lot of them are scattered all over the place, which I'm very grateful for the internet for that reason.
Got you.
Yeah.
Are there like maybe bigger named actors who are like questioning the vaccine, but maybe just aren't as outspoken, but are able to slide by purely because of their status?
There has to be. I just don't know them. But you
I
mean
mean,
personally, but you can.
yeah. I mean, people who have said, like Woody Harrelson has said some things. I mean, but I would assume, like for example, I would assume Joaquin Phoenix. I don't know him, but based on what I know of him, when he was talking about we shouldn't even be drinking milk, somebody like that, I can't imagine he would be. But I know people who agree, but they're just silent, and they think that they don't want their families to be affected, or they think that if they, like I said, use a big card, then that will keep them safe. But at some point, maybe they won't. If this happens again, which it might, the card's not going to work. They're going to find some other way. They're going to make sure that they monitor you. So we have to nip this in the bud now, so this never happens again. And there's a lot of lawsuits that are happening too. A lot of lawsuits.
Yeah, I bet there's plenty of lawsuits. There's so much stuff that's coming out right now, and there's just also so much beyond just like the mainstream like science that's coming out to show like there were a lot of inconsistencies and fraudulent behavior of the last few years. I mean, there's people that are like in our world, that are challenging the foundations of the allopathic system. I mean, just yesterday, an event came out, the end of COVID, which our friends Alex Zek and Mike Winter co-created, and there's over 100 hours of content interviewing from every element of the last 3 years, every aspect of the last 3 years, where the lies were and how things were propagandized, and even challenging the foundational principles of virology. Like there's so much that the public does not know because, again, you have government, you have media, you have the establishment that is determining what these people think, but also determining what doctors are learning in medical school. So it starts from the top down, and most people go along to get along. And then let's say they get a job and they're making a certain amount of money, like, to stand up for your principles, for so many people means I can't put food on the table like I used to. Maybe I have to pay for my kids' school. Maybe I have a certain lifestyle, and people will just go, I don't want to deal with that, and like, I'm not, like, everyone has to make their own choice. But again, I just respect you for being open and honest with, the choices that you've made the last few years, but also not just like having conversations about it, but right now being like, okay, well, I'm connected with these other individuals in my industry that have a similar mindset. What can we do about it? Okay, because there's knowledge and then there's like taking action. And you're just like, hey, what can we do starting at the local level and see how that shifts things, from a policy standpoint. And, I
Let
just
me
have
ask you
a lot of
this
respect.
question. Do you think that without the influence of a union, it would have been more difficult to try and implement the broader scale mandates if like all these businesses, production companies were independent? I feel like it would have been a lot harder to try collectivize this sentiment.
I think I want to answer that real quickly, and then I want your point. I think one point too is that things start from the top down, and correct me if I'm wrong, Namakula, but like projects wouldn't get insurance, right? If they weren't honoring like certain protocols. So that's like a lot of people would say, "Oh, our hands are tied." So can you talk about that?
That's a good point. Both of you have a good point. I do believe that if everybody was independent, there would be people that are like, well, I don't want to do this. Why should I have to do that? But SAG tied everybody's hands by saying, well, you can't use these actors unless you follow this return to work agreement. But then on top of that, I one of my awake colleagues was saying that he was working. There's a producer he was working with. The producer said to him, they claim that it's up to the producers to decide whether to implement this return to work agreement. He had a production and he didn't want to implement. He didn't want to, make the actors do it. And he said SAG would not greenlight it as a SAG production. So he says, forget it. Then I'm going to do it as a non-union production. So I have control over how my shoot is run. So yes, there's definitely an agenda that's being pushed. It's from the top down, and the people, the SAG people that are trying to say that, oh well, it's up to the producers. Actually, it's not. It's you are creating this climate. You're implementing this, and there's this is the thing. If for some reason the union falls or splinters, they won't have any power. Like you said, Joel, it's like, but because right now everything's under that umbrella, they're controlling a lot of how things are run. So I know independently, if there was a production going on and based on the information that I have, I would be fine working on it if it was, not requiring these mandates. Other people feel like, oh, well, SAG was protecting us. So you're both correct in the sense that there is a control factor going on here, and it would be very different. So if something does happen and the union is no longer around, it's going to create all these splinter groups. It's going to be very interesting. I think that right now, based on, like I said, not only with like the mandates, but just like questioning their negotiating strategy. Like right now, at 11:59 Pacific time tonight is when SAG will either strike or not strike. We're in negotiations right now with with our contracts, and right now there's a Writers Guild strike. So if there is a strike right now, it's going to be very interesting. It's already been so challenging the past few years, and I think that there's going to be, if we do strike, I think there's going to be a lot of actors that are just going to go FICOR, which means FICOR means you're a dues paying non-member, which means you pay your dues, but you're not allowed to vote, and there's certain perks that you don't get from being in SAG, but you're allowed to do non-SAG work without being penalized. So if we do strike, I suspect a lot of people are either going to do stuff under the wire, or they're going to go FICOR, or they're going to give up their SAG card completely. So it'll be an interesting 24 hours, like what happens and where things go.
Why are they considering striking right now?
Because the contracts that we have with the streaming platforms and channels and movie deals and things. Well, here's the thing. They're being very secretive about negotiations, right? Which is also very a problem. Which one of my campaign's policy or goals is to get rid of to have transparency. So the president and the chief negotiator released a video some days ago saying we're fighting for you and we're negotiating. And literally the president said, well, we can't really tell you what we're talking about. It's kind of hush hush behind closed doors. And you watch this video and like, well, why did you even release a video to tell us what's going on? And then say, you can't tell us what's going on. So who knows what's happening? I mean, but the point is that they're supposed to be negotiating the best deal for us. What's happened a lot with the streaming and things, the deals that we have in place, the money does not reflect the revenue of the shows. So they're trying to negotiate for the best deal, but we don't know what they're doing and what they're saying for us in there. So that's why we're in a position where right now they can't come to an agreement, and it's going to expire tonight. And then if there's no agreement, then we're supposedly going to strike. So it could happen. I feel like we're close to it, but because I don't have information, because they're not telling us stuff, I don't know what's on the table. I don't know what's proposed. I don't know if it's a horrible deal or if it's manageable or if someone's being paid off to strike. I don't know. It's very questionable. A lot of people have lost faith in the union because of these things, which is why I definitely feel like I want to make an effort to run and get in there and have an honest voice and a voice of a working actor who has the best interest of everybody involved and not just a select few, who are running things. So.
Yeah. What do you love about storytelling? Because Hollywood, especially in our audience of people who go down all the rabbit holes, they have their thoughts on certain projects. But like, there's also like, I love storytelling. Yeah, I can critique and I can say like, hey, like these movies that these big studios are putting out, who knows where it's coming from. There's a lot of propaganda about different agendas that are at play to influence people's psyches and behavior. So that's one side of it, but I also don't lose the other side, which is like there's such beautiful emotion and like storytelling has been around since the beginning of time. And
Yeah.
it's how we relate, it's how we connect, it's how we experience different aspects of life. And I would just love to hear like your thoughts on that.
I'm going to repeat what you just said. That's
Okay,
just
great.
too. Yeah, I mean, I always feel like, with storytelling, you are taking somebody on a journey, whether it be a journey that they're familiar with or something a world that they're totally never been exposed to. You are enabling somebody to connect on an emotional, intellectual level, to experience something, to have a thought, to evolve and maybe the way they view something, to reflect on something, to learn something new, to connect, find a way to connect with other people. I mean, I think there's so much magic and beauty around, filmmaking and around storytelling in general, around, having a conversation with somebody that maybe doesn't look like you, has a completely different background, but you have this core connection about something, and then you're able to learn new things from each other and expand as a human being. I mean, that to me is really valuable, and that as human beings, we're here to connect, and I believe connect, uplift, and evolve, help each other evolve and support each other. And I think we're more alike than different, and I think and the differences, I think, should be celebrated and not looked upon as a negative. It's like, how can we benefit from someone's differences? How can we grow as a person? How can their differences maybe make my life better or my thinking better? So I think there's a lot of power, but like you said, also, with some of the storytelling that comes out of, that machine, there is definitely an agenda a lot of the times. And, you know, but I think for the most part, storytelling is just such a beautiful way of communicating, connecting with other people. And that's never going to go away. Like you said, it's never going to go away, whether it be campfire stories or bedtime stories or what have you. So I'm always looking for a way to find a way to connect with somebody. And circling back to the voiceover thing, I feel like that to me is such an imaginative thing, because it's interactive, because the person hearing your voice, that's engaging their imagination. They're creating visuals based on your narration. So you're not, the only thing that you have is the voice, the character, maybe some sound effects, music that you're creating, and they're painting the picture in their head that's very individual, that's very specific to them. So that to me is really an amazing thing to do as well. And it's I know I really enjoy doing it, and I've been doing this narration project called The Feisty Beast for like 2 years now with poet Mo Phillips, and she writes these great poems, and they're all different and all interesting, and we collaborate on working on them. And then her husband, who's the mixer, Ian, and he does the sound design. And I feel like I really want to get involved in like sharing that more and getting involved in education, especially with all the homeschooling now, with what's being exposed by what's going on in the schools. Um, I'm really excited about that. So I'm really looking into that aspect of it, of how we can get that work out there and connect with all these different people. We had, a show in Australia and England, people are posting it. So I'm really just excited about just being able to work as an artist, no matter what happens. I'm always going to be artistic, and I'm always going to find a way to express myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What Thank you for that. Like, what's your final message to all the artists out there, and maybe artists that might kind of be more aligned with, the things that we talk about on this podcast and things that you're sharing, but might be keeping, quiet, or just artists in general, what's your final message?
I guess my final message would be to be true to yourself. And it might be a hard road, and it might be a lonely road, but if you're not true to yourself and don't have any integrity, anything after that is going to have a sour taste to it. And I think that goes for not just artists, but anybody who does not follow their higher purpose, their higher self, and does something in the meantime for ease. In the end or in the future, they will regret it, and there will be no positive rewards. They will not be rewarded for going against themselves. You only have yourself to look at in the mirror in the end. And I feel like no matter what happens, I did the best that I could in the circumstances, and I followed my gut and my integrity, and I stayed true, and I attracted people like you guys, and other people who were like-minded. And I think maybe that was the whole point. Like, maybe all along I've been here and I've been surrounded by false people. And now that this has happened and it's forced me to step up, it's enabled me for those people to fall behind and the real people to come to me. So it's an exciting time. It's a leap of faith. You don't know what's going to happen, but that's part of the journey. Is the exciting thing about, you don't really know what's going to happen. And I look at my life, I'm like, if I had known some things that was going to, I mean, I never would have known how did this lead to this? You just don't know until you're there and you look back, you're like, wow. So that thing that this thing led me here. I never would have thought it would have happened that way. So just be open and just be kind to yourself and just know that everything will work out the way it's supposed to. That's all really, I hope.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I mean, you're speaking our language. I mean, even just how this podcast began and our lives, like, would this have happened if, the events of 2020 didn't unfold? I don't know. But when you do speak your truth, and you are true to yourself, that's when you attract your tribe, the people that you're aligned with, and everyone else, they could find their tribe and who they're aligned with. And ideally, I'd love for us to find common ground and communicate. But this is where transparency comes into play. This is where people are allowed to be exposed to all the information, and then they can use their minds and connect to themselves and discernment and decide what's right for them. And I think that's another huge thing that's coming out more in the mainstream is this idea of censorship. We won't get into that, but just like it's like if things are being censored and if people don't take the initiative to seek out information, I mean, you have articles that were coming out in the mainstream media. It was like, don't do your own research. It's dangerous,
Crazy.
and it's just like, it's laughable, some of this stuff, so, know yourself. Self-knowledge is the foundation. Figure out who you are, what your gifts are, speak your truth, and then see what happens in life. I'm so grateful that we've stayed connected all these years. And I said it already a few times, but like, in an industry where most people have a certain way of being or a certain industry, or maybe you're going along to get along, you are an outlier. And, kudos to you, and I wish you the best with your candidacy and helping to bring forth change in your world.
Thank you. No, thank you. And I really appreciate you guys bringing me on. Like I said, I really admire what you're doing. And, it just shows how you guys met, kind of, hey, let's do this podcast. Like you just never know who you're going to meet and how it's going to happen. And when it happened and this great thing, magical thing goes on, you're like, wow, I didn't foresee that. So it's a testament to just standing in your truth and just having that integrity in it. And you'll attract the right people. You'll attract your tribe, and you might be lonely for a while, but you got to stick. I always say no company is better than bad company. Right. So I think I'm really excited for, and I love watching your episodes and stuff. And it just, it just shows that we're going to make it. We'll be okay. It's not going to be easy, but I feel good about things. So I really appreciate you inviting me to be a part of it. So
yeah, of course. How can people find you, support you, like websites, etc.?
Yeah, my website is namakula.com, namakula.com. And I have information also about my SAG candidacy and other things I'm doing. So, yeah. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Namakula, so awesome to connect with you.
Yes.
Do you want to close out and thank our audience for listening and that beautiful voice of yours?
Thank you all for listening to the podcast with Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
That's amazing.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean. Fast forward in evolution to a place where we can share our confusions. Yeah, 450 BC, I'm sharing to you.